A modern civil service.
Modern civil service.
A modern civil service.
To me, a modern civil service is one that's ready to lead the UK through the next big challenges.
People that reflect the society that we serve, designing services built around the customer to deliver the outcomes they need.
Skilled,
innovative, ambitious.
A modern civil service.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Modernisers and Reformers, celebrating the people building a modern civil service. And I am delighted to say that we are joining you live from Civil Service Live Edinburgh. And it's going to be a great conversation. Great to be here with Anne and Steph today. For the eagle-eared amongst you, I am not your normal host. I am Gaia Marcus, Head of Engagement for the Modernisation and Reform team. And Steph, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi Gaia, and thanks for the invitation to speak today. I'm Steph Brown. I head the product community at Registers of Scotland.
And I'm Anne Stewart, and I feel that I'm slightly cuckoo in the nest here because I'm not a civil servant. I'm a professional support lawyer at Shepherd and Wedderburn, and I do a lot of work with the Register of Scotland through my role in the Law Society Property Law Committee.
Fantastic. Well, welcome both. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Steph, to kick us off, can you please tell us a bit about the Registers of Scotland?
Sure, of course. Registers of Scotland, or ROS, is a non-ministerial office of the Scottish Government. We maintain land and property information and some personal information through a series of registers. We collect national data sets, including house price statistics, and we have 21 registers in total, the most recent of which was launched just in April of this year, and that's the Register of Persons Holding a Controlled Interest in Land, which very thankfully is abbreviated to RCI. Its purpose is around transparency, and that really speaks to why we have a registration authority in Scotland and in the rest of the UK as well. Our oldest land register dates from 1617. That's the Register of Sasines, and that's the world's oldest public land register. But our ways of working are very much of the everyday. Our customers, like Anne, need to access our services on a daily, if not sometimes hourly basis.
Fantastic. And Anne, I'd love to find out more about what ROS means for you as a customer.
Right. Well, I suppose as a customer, we have a single choice because as property lawyers, we have to register property titles when they're sold and transferred in order to perfect the purchaser's right. And to do that, we have to go to the land register. So we're kind of a captive audience as far as that's concerned. But certainly over the last couple of decades or so, I think the modernisation that has been going on, what Steph said about us having to have access daily, if not hourly, we have been able to do that with online services and that sort of thing that ROS have developed over the last probably a couple of decades, really.
And on the subject of modernisation, Steph, I understand that you recently won a Modern Civil Service Award at the Operational Delivery Awards. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit about your winning submission and how it came about?
Sure. So our submission was the Digital Submission Services for ROS. We created over a 3-month period between March and July 5 digital submission services across 4 of the core registers we maintain. Our impetus behind that was our response to the public health emergency and the closure of our buildings in Edinburgh and Glasgow, just as our customers' buildings also had to close to follow the recommendations from government. That had an immediate effect to the property situation, the property market, in as much as daily we received thousands of applications via paper to our offices, and we had to very quickly identify a means that we could keep the property market transacting and providing that assurance and certainty via different means. So there was a lot of engagement with our customers, including Anne with many hats on as Property Law Committee member, and a lot of engagement with other parts of the government as well. Within Scotland, the coronavirus legislation came into effect on the 6th of April, given the building's closure came into effect on the 24th of March. That gives some indication of the pace at which we were working. On the 7th of April, we released the first of those digital submission services, and we released a further 4 to the end of July. So in March 2020, prior to our office closures, we were receiving about 38%, I'm not sure I can say about giving such a precise percentage, of our applications via paper. By the end of 2020, around 94% of our applications were received via digital submission services.
I think it's really easy to forget how quickly things changed in that kind of March,
Absolutely.
April period. So kind of for our listeners, if I'd been using your services on the 1st of March, what would I have done? And then when I used your service on the 1st of May, what would I then have been able to do?
So really what you'd have seen was channel shift from printing off your documents and sending those to us via, for example, a courier service or a secure delivery service, waiting a couple of days for those to be submitted to us, and then having that application being recorded by us. Instead, after the digital submission services were launched, our customers still had to use paper activities, paper documents, but we received those immediately and digitally via the press of a button. It was as simple as that for our customers to be able to submit directly to us, so they got immediate certainty and assurance about those transactions coming in and arriving at our offices. One of the key points for us was we had to make this change, but we wanted to make this change in the most effective way possible. We didn't want to react to circumstances. We wanted to have a considered, responsive approach to this. Digital submissions hasn't been a throwaway means for us. It's absolutely been something that we still use daily. We've built our services and further services around this way of working. It's been a really successful activity for us as an organisation.
Fantastic. So as in other sectors and companies, we very much see that there's been a channel shift that started in COVID, but then has been maintained going forward.
Definitely.
Yes, although I think that, to be fair, that was very much our sort of direction of travel. But the lockdown gave the profession and the registers the impetus to actually find a digital solution very quickly. But one of the great things about those early days was that we were in regular, almost hourly communication.
Yeah.
The Law Society, Property Law Committee and the Registers of Scotland, discussing, trying to work out what was the best way to deal with that. I mean, the country was still in shock.
Absolutely.
But it was that kind of very much that collaborative, lots of communication, lots of discussion, what's going to be best for the registers to build that the customers will get the most out of, and I think that's one of the hallmarks of its success, that collaborative process that we went through at the time.
And thinking back to, say, February 2020, as a customer, is this something that you wanted to happen already? Was this kind of on your horizon?
Oh, very definitely. I mean, my firm's predominantly a commercial firm rather than residential, although we do some of that. But from a commercial perspective, there's a huge appetite, and has been for some time, on a more digital way of working, electronic signatures and so on. We have a lot of our commercial clients who are very keen to use that. It's so much more efficient. As Steph mentioned about the sustainable way of not using paper and so on, but we were kind of stuck with a 19th century approach to land registration, paper in, paper out sort of idea, which transformed overnight to digital. But I think you had a ready, willing, and waiting audience that were ready to adopt it. There were some people probably who would have found it a wee bit tricky, but it's such a simple system as well that I think we were very receptive and take up an adoption. Well, we didn't really have any choice, but I think it was very much because it was part of temporary emergency legislation. Very quickly, people were saying, "Oh, please tell us this is here to stay," and indeed it is. Now you don't have to worry about, "Oh no, this must be with the registers today." Press of a button and it's with them. So it's just that instantaneous element of the registration application process, the submission process, that it makes a huge difference in those sorts of ways.
I think that's really interesting what you say about the immediacy of the submission, because that's certainly feedback that we've had from customers. So I'm thinking about, if this isn't too highfalutin a phrase, the democratisation of geographical inequalities. So for example, within Highlands and Islands, we've got a number of firms who've contacted us to say, we could be plus 1 day on any other central belt firm sending submissions to you.
Yes.
Now we have that immediately taking place. And it's been really transformative for them. It's given an open playing field.
That's a vital point, because we do have, we've got very remote areas in Scotland where lawyers will go anywhere, and so they're clinging on rock faces and things like that. But that accessibility of an essential service in the property sphere is a great point.
I mean, I think that feels really profound, actually. Could you draw out for our listeners kind of the impact of working in this way for Register Scotland and the elements that you're most proud of?
I mean, it's been transformative for us. As Anne's called out, we already had a trajectory to move towards greater digital registration. It's our vision to be a digital registration and information business trusted for our integrity. This very much was in line with that approach, but it had that immediacy of response. So we've really built our subsequent systems around this. So for example, last year we launched Register Land and Property. If we think about digital submissions as being the digital envelope and all the factors that includes, so if you think about when you're posting something, do I have the right postage, where do I post it, what size of envelope do I use? Digital submissions covers all of those security and assurance aspects. It gives us certainty that we're accepting good data and information in, and subsequently can push that back out. But what we really wanted to do was look at the front end of that, and that's where Register Land and Property helps us collate better information, give a better service to our customers by providing links between the different services that they use. So we've really built upon this. I'm really proud that as an organisation we adopted this as our core mission, and within days we were able to continue to provide that statutory function to the people of Scotland and to the professional users who require to have access to that. I'm really proud that we were consistent with our approach to build. So the Scottish approach to service design speaks to building with, not for, our customers. And I think in times of crisis, it's incredibly easy to fall back on those easy behaviours of telling people this is what they will do. That absolutely wasn't the approach that we took. We built with our customers, we designed with our customers, we ran 50 user research sessions in, I think, the first 6 months of the pandemic. And that's why our CSAT score, for example, our customer satisfaction score, rose from 83 to 90 by the end of 2020. So for us, it's been a really profound transformative activity.
So something that I think has been felt across the civil service is that the pandemic, whilst obviously devastating in so many ways, has been the catalyst for new ways of working. And we've definitely heard from you around how this kind of gave you common cause to maybe overcome some cultural barriers. Why was Register Scotland not a digital first organisation before the pandemic, would you say?
So I think it's important to say that we absolutely were working in that direction. Anne referenced some of our legislation in 2016, for example. We sought some digital regs. That date lingers because I remember being in front of the committee speaking about it, to enable us to open up our register to more digital transactions. But that sort of light bulb or light switch moment from one day to the next was really such a transformative space. It accelerated the change in ways that we simply couldn't have delivered in a normal 3 month or quarter period. So I think that's been an incredibly focus factor for us. But this way of working was always on our trajectory. We always had a roadmap to this way of working. It just meant that in order to be able to respond quickly and with the sort of quality of service that we seek to underpin our services, that we had to bring this in slightly earlier than we would otherwise have had facility to do so.
And I mean, what do you think this experience has told you about overcoming cultural barriers to innovation in the civil service? How do we take this and apply it, do you think, to, let's say normal times, if we ever see those?
Well, I think for me there's something about that core purpose and core message. We live in very busy times, we live in very noisy times, and in the uncertainty of the pandemic and the outside uncertainty, being able to come to work and have really clear outcomes that we're driving towards, I think was pivotal to our success. That's certainly an approach that we've carried forward as an organisation. I think that visibility and transparency, both in-house and externally, and I'm sure Anne can speak more about that, has been really important as well. So keeping our colleagues informed, keeping our colleagues engaged, all community webinars, having that approach of listening out for good ideas. That has been really an experience that no one could have predicted, but one that certainly brought benefit to us.
Yes, I would agree. I think that's probably really at the core of the success. This, as I said earlier, this kind of collaborative approach, then the listening approach. I mean, in previous decades, perhaps, we as a legal profession would probably be, told, here's what you're getting. And there was never really any kind of dialogue, and it's a wee bit like to use a horrible cliche, but the sort of lawyers are from Mars, registration people are from Venus type of situation. We kind of knew bits about what each other did, but we didn't really understand fully. And I think certainly in my experience, the discussions and interactivity that we had with the registers in the lead up to them building this service, there was a lot more insight. I certainly got a lot more insight about what the issues were, where the barriers were, where the hoops that you had to go through were, and I think that they definitely got the same from us, from the profession. So we've got a much deeper understanding of what each organisation or what each sector, if you like, of our property world has to do. And that, I think, has helped to inform. I feel that almost like there's no barrier at all to discussions now. We can say anything to each other. We now have a better understanding of, or appreciate, why that's not going to be possible about each other's ways of working. So that has definitely made a big difference.
So from what you're saying, has that kind of breaking down of boundaries that happened during this period, has that then kind of led to new ways of working between your organisations now in 2022? Is the relationship different?
I think the relationship's more open. Previously, although certainly we had a new land registration system introduced in 2014 under the 2012 Act, and that changed a lot of things. And certainly there were discussions and dialogues and working groups and focus groups and all the rest of it in the lead up to that going live in 2014. But I got the sense that it was right, we'll write down everything you say and then we'll just probably, there'll be a bit of doing what we were going to do anyway type of thing. So, but this time around, but I think that's been improving over the years, because that for me felt like the start of that kind of having a dialogue with the profession. But I think it was definitely, the complexion of it changed completely when we were both, we were both in the lifeboat together, and we had to work together to make this happen. And so there was a much more open and eager attempts to get to know each other and what we needed to know about each other's businesses, and that I think has started a new kind of dialogue where we actually feel we're there to support each other, as opposed to just simply provide a service and receive a service, which in a way was what it may have been before.
And I think you can see that in the everyday. So things like the adoption of each other's use of language. I hear that in the teams that I work with, who are talking about remos, for example, rather than our slightly more stiffer formal standard securities and discharges. But things also like when we're designing and developing new registers, so our CI that just went live in April, we're also building the Register of Movable Transactions. That goes through a discovery, alpha and beta phase, and I've heard customers say in conversation, oh yeah, we're part of your private beta, or yeah, we did some research with you for discovery. And there's something I think really powerful about having that connection between the two spaces.
And for any of our listeners, I mean, I'm not sure if they will not, but in case any of our listeners don't know what we mean by an alpha and a beta and a discovery phase, can you quickly explain those?
Sure, so those are the principles of good design that government departments across the UK build to. So discovery, much like you might surmise from its name, is when you start to identify some of the problems that you're trying to solve, and it's very heavily user research based, as are all of the subsequent elements as well. And then you start to move into the next phases where you're building your first iterations of the service or product. Private beta is essentially where you're doing an invitation type service. That was actually how we launched our digital submission services. Because we had those relationships with firms, we invited some of them into private beta to give us real on the ground feedback of how those services were working, and then we would announce our public beta. And in preparation for this, I was looking back at our weekly updates, and again to see the keeper of the registers, our CEO, describe that we're now in private beta phase or we're in public beta phase. Again, for me as a product person, that's fantastic to see that being used with our customers and being understood by our customers.
Fantastic. So we've touched on, I think, some of the key hallmarks of really transformational services. So user-centered design, deep empathy between people at all stages of a product's development, really utilising user research and service design to truly understand a problem. For parts of the civil service, especially those that work very closely with outside organisations such as yours, what do you think they could learn from what you've done so far?
Well, what I hope they hear in this podcast is an endorsement of their ways of working. So, you know, these terms that maybe even 5 years ago might have been slightly more alien, I think are reaching such good penetration within the civil service. I hope what they hear is a description of activity and the success in the award, that they see that sort of same quality of service within their own organisations as well. I think there's fantastic work being done across the civil service, and we're certainly illustrative of the fact that bringing your customers in more closely to how you work brings benefit to all parts in providing a quality service.
Yes, and I would say I think what it does demonstrate is that because, like, I should imagine for a lot of civil service departments, it's like this, you know, you have a captive audience as your customer, and realising, as registers did pretty early on, that audience is actually really willing, ready and able to enter into some kind of dialogue, and that can actually, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts as a result of the two sides of the equation sharing their experience to come up with, you know, the product or deliver whatever it is that they're doing. So I think, you know, customers are like to be involved, like to be asked their opinion, and we certainly have lots of opinions.
When you, I was glad to hear, I've always loved working with stakeholders, clients and or customers with a lot of opinions, so that's fantastic. I think often when you work within government or for the civil service, there can be a bit of a reservation around sharing things before they're fully cooked. This idea that if you go out, you know, who knows where it'll go. What did you do to overcome those kind of barriers of open working and sharing with your customer base before something was, you know, ready to go, say, public beta?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to sort of set your parameters within, you know, either your research session or your display and feedback sessions. I think just that really clarity of what this particular piece of work or activity is seeking to do can be so helpful in just really focusing the feedback and the discussion to some good outcomes and good feedback that can then be taken in and addressed within further iterations. I mean, we made it very clear that what we weren't releasing were one and done services. These were early iterations, and regularly throughout the period between April to July, we would iterate on and we'd release further functionality that we had gathered from customer effort, score material that we'd gathered from direct engagement with our customers as well. So I think it's really just helpful to be as open as possible, and there's no such thing as too much context giving. We're very appreciative of the fact that our customers are working at considerable pace. They have a number of different demands upon their time, so it's our responsibility to make the context of the sessions that we have with them as clear as possible, so that we can get those results and those outcomes as quickly as possible, and the benefit accrued by everyone as quickly as possible too.
Fantastic. Look, we've covered a lot of these already, I think, but can you think of any other lessons learned that you think teams from across the civil service can learn from this project? And same question to you, Anne, but thinking, to our wider customer and client base.
So within ROS, we use a system of enduring teams to provide long-term planning and release and functions within our product and development spaces, for example. For this specific activity, we use mission teams, which was a departure for us. And we did that because we had to be so responsive to time. We've actually already used this recently in the warm Scottish welcome for displaced Ukrainian people. ROS provided a mission team composed predominantly of colleagues from our service design community who worked with our data and data colleagues at Scottish Government and some colleagues from Social Security as well. And one of the points of feedback that they regularly got from other departments they were working with was the power of having access to good artefacts like service blueprints, for example, and the fact that having that common artefact set can immediately cut down the number of conversations that need to be had because there's clear understanding from the off. And I think there was something for me hearing other colleagues say that about what we've kind of taken to be our normal way of working. That was incredibly powerful. And I would also call out the fact that, ROS is a broad church. We have a variety of different skill sets within our organisation, and each one of those skill sets, each one of those roles made a contribution to this work, and we're incredibly appreciative of having such a committed and engaged workforce. You mentioned, I think earlier, that we are 400 years old, and not myself, and we're incredibly proud of that. We recognise that carries such a lot of value, but we're not an historical organisation. We're an organisation that has a very clear everyday purpose, and that was absolutely something that we got behind as a key mission and key statement.
Yes, I'm not sure I would be so bold as to suggest to civil service how they could improve their processes, but I think probably from the personal experience of the digital submission service, that taking time to get to know what your customers' issues are, what makes them tick, where their hurdles are. It definitely. That made the end product so much. It's why it's so popular, because it actually fits the profession and what the profession needs to do very well, and it's of course evolving, and that evolution is also taking into account how the customers are responding to using it.
Fantastic. So I'm really hearing shared purpose. Multidisciplinary, focused, either task or mission teams, depending on your language, shared products or artifacts, shared language, which you raised earlier, so really using each other's language, and then, as you say, Anne, building those deep empathetic relationships where you really understand where each team, organisation is coming from.
Absolutely. And
what they need from the situation. I mean, fantastic. Steph, you mentioned in your award submission that you now have plans to further build upon the digital submission service. You've covered a bit of this already, but give us the highlights. What can we expect next?
Well, this is straight off the press. We've been running a proof of concept with our customers over the last couple of months. That was born out of a conveyancing conference that ROS hosted in June of last year, the Future of Conveyancing Conference. We then held 5 webinars, I think, with interested customers around digital registration and new ways of working with us. We received our first application via the proof of concept, which was the generation of a deed by ROS within our systems, and that was a residential transaction. And just earlier this week, we received our second application via the proof of concept, which was a digitally signed commercial transaction, which has now been registered onto the land register. So these are proofs of concept, not easy for me to say. They're very much in the learning space, both for us and our customers. We've learned a huge amount from this activity, and we're really pleased that our customers have given us that feedback as well. But it really sets out the way in which we intend to work as we progress towards digital registration, and that's in this collaborative listening space that continues to drive improvements.
Fantastic. And Anne, as a customer.
Yeah, do you know, I feel quite emotional hearing that from Steph, because the digitally signed digital document on the land register has been kind of our holy grail. It's what we've been waiting for. That's what our future looks like, and it's wonderful that actually our future is actually very, very close. That's what what we want to see. That will make such a huge difference, not just to the profession, but more importantly to our clients who are transacting. To make the transactional experience so much more straightforward, speedy. Not bogged down by paper and process and all the rest of it. So I can't wait to see more of that.
I have to say, if you had told me yesterday that a conversation about land registry and titles would make us feel emotional, I wouldn't have believed you, but I've really, really enjoyed that. I'm a convert.
Great.
Job change, guys. So, we have recently launched the Modern Civil Service Awards, which are a new set of quarterly awards designed to recognise, on a more regular basis, those everyday heroes, such as Steph, who are driving action to build a modern civil service. So Steph, as someone who's won the Modern Civil Service Award at the Operational Delivery Awards, what would you say to someone considering nominating either themselves or another team for a Modern Civil Service Award?
Oh, go take a look at that website. Go have a look at the awards and the categories, because having just been in the last couple of months at the ODP Awards, I found it incredibly powerful, the pride and the range of work that's being undertaken across the civil service. It was a ceremony unlike anything that I could have expected, and I left absolutely buoyed and on a high. And I would really encourage people to apply and identify champions within their own teams too.
Fantastic. And kind of as a kind of geeing up for someone who writing those applications can be a bit boring, so having to kind of work out the criteria and why someone else often deserves that, how did it feel to receive the award?
So I received it on behalf, obviously, of Registers of Scotland, very keen to make that aware, otherwise I won't be let back into the building. But both the system of writing the submission was in itself of value, because we did that as a small team, and it was a really great reflection point. It's been a really busy 2 years, as it will be for everyone listening, and to be able to reflect back, we've had over 1 million submissions now via digital submission service, and to think back of those very early hours and days in the first wave of this, it's been a really powerful process for us. And I think work with colleagues, we've got some cracking networks within the civil service as well, and give yourself time to sit down and think about and celebrate that success.
Fantastic. I would really echo the value of awards in actually writing down what you have done.
Yes.
Because it's so easy to forget. Dear listeners, if you know someone who's living our vision of a modern civil service, you can nominate them now for a Modern Civil Service Award at www.civilserviceawards.com.